Okay. I'm just curious about the global business services. How many at this table are currently either have them or are considering implementing them? Show of hands.
Well, we're exploring it, yes.
Okay. So just to begin with, maybe because you're exploring it, Faye, maybe you can just highlight the business case for it. Why is this necessary?
Well, I think in a global organisation, if you have strong global functions, which we do at IHG, if you think about the support functions of, finance and, HR and, commercial for us is quite significant as well around our call centres, for example, as well as HR, then what you find is that each function is trying to optimise itself and trying to create its own efficiencies and trying to manage that almost in a silo, if that makes sense, to try and deliver their functional efficiencies and improve the services that are delivered. But the missed opportunity is to join it up and to try and make sure that you're taking a global approach to delivering back office services in the most effective way. And it's not always the cheapest way, but it's in the most effective way to support the business. And that's quite a significant challenge because that's obviously huge change impact, quite difficult to plan, manage, execute, and requires a lot of kind of careful engagement across the organisation. So it's something that we're in the very early discovery stages of. And obviously there's a lot of activity in HR. We're going ahead with our work, as I've just said. Our global technology function are equally looking to create a more efficient model, outsourcing, offshoring, etc., as are other parts of the organisation. And we've got a real challenge to join that up and create the right governance model around that and create the right forward plan. So we're working on that right now, and it's sorry.
No, I was going to ask you a question. I think the most interesting part for us as HR professionals is how the interaction with finance, with procurement, with IT and the governance comes together in terms of how you get aligned in your decision making. How is that working and how are you finding those discussions?
As I say, we're at the really early stages at the moment of trying to just establish the journey that each function is on. And I think we've said that the initial priority should be to join that up around a governance model. If you could coordinate through the governance some of the choices that are being made about where work is being placed and the type of work, and making sure that we're maximising the arrangements with our suppliers, and then over time you might move to a more consolidated model. But as I say, it's very early thinking for us, and I think there's a big, there is an opportunity for us, but I don't think we're going to get to it over the next year or so. I think it will take longer. It's just more complex to execute when you're a big global organisation.
The way we do it at Vodafone is that we have a so-called Global Business Service Management team.
Right.
And each leader of the function, for example, HR service, IT, network, SCM, finance operation, they have a place at the table with the management team. And the decisions, and we sit together on a regular basis, at least monthly, and the big decisions that affect all of us we take together, and we also look at the opportunities that this integration brings to us. And on the other hand, we make sure that the functional leads, for example for HR and the shared service center, report into the functional lead in HR service globally, so that we take the decisions that just affect our function. Yeah. But this really creates a team spirit and a common understanding of the way and the direction we want to move. And we decide also together whether we want to establish, for example, a new shared service center in a new location and weigh up the pros and cons for these locations together as a team, come up with a common decision on that.
Do you find that one function, for example finance or IT, might take the lead on this? Is there more influence from one particular area of business than the other?
The lead was very much driven in the beginning by finance operations, because that was the obvious area where we started our journey 5 years ago for shared services. But there is no real understanding that this is very much driven by finance or any other area, because we really consider ourselves as one team and drive towards one success story.
And what about Intercontinental? Who's taking the lead on that? Is that something that's been managed as a group, or is there one particular function that's more influential?
Well, we don't have a function today that's Global Business Services. We just have each function, so HR, finance, etc., and they all constitute our executive committee. So we're just trying to go through that phase of just understanding what the opportunity would be, and in the meantime obviously we're focusing on making each function, and I take responsibility for the HR function, as efficient as possible and as effective as possible. So we're certainly not at the stage that you are at in Vodafone in terms of having the organisation infrastructure to support that.
How do you ensure that HR, for example, as a function doesn't get sidelined?
I think HR play a really critical role, because not only are we trying to make our function a world-class function, but we're also trying to support the business, or all other parts of the business, to execute their change programs in a really effective way. So there's a real onus on the HR function, I think, to role model what great change management looks like when you're managing the change on your own patch. It's the constant thing about wearing 2 or 3 hats at the same time, which can be quite challenging for the function, because everyone is experiencing personal change at the same time as trying to support other parts of the business. So that in itself I think is quite a challenge for us, but I think the key thing as well is not looking at the with our change programme in HR or our transformation, not thinking about it just as a systems implementation and moving to an outsourced partner. We're trying to look at it around how do we become more effective as a function? What's the right capabilities that we need? What are the gaps? Are we organised in the most appropriate way? Have we got the right the right amount of time to deliver this change? So we've implemented what we're calling a no-fly zone. So the next 2 or 3 months before we go live with our programme, we've said we cannot deliver certain steady state processes to support the business, and we won't be able to do a lot of change support elsewhere because we are focusing on getting this right. So you have to make some quite strong choices and trade-offs so that you can give yourself enough time to deliver the change well.
Okay, I'm interested to hear from Tim and John just about their experiences with clients, whether you see a cultural clash, if you like, within different functions.
I think that the key thing is that it has to be, I think to your point, it has to be led by a desire to improve, and almost the way that that's delivered is kind of secondary initially. The first state has to be, we have to make, we're doing this to make this better, and to explain and to have clear objectives about how we're going to make that better. Then also I think it's absolutely key to get buy-in from all areas of the business. I think when I've looked at projects where either finance or HR or IT or procurement leads, that's kind of where the challenge comes. It has to be everyone has to be on board and putting in the same kind of direction. And I think what we're seeing a lot, and this comes a little bit to the global business services side, is that increasingly what people are looking for is a platform. So they're looking for a platform that can be deployed across multiple functions, cross-functional, so that you're not having to increase your IT investment and infrastructure to try and deliver the success. It has to be looking, you're looking at something that can be scalable and rolled out to multiple different business units. And I think that the most successful projects I've seen is where from day one, there's a clear set of objectives. You know who needs to buy in which different areas, and you're working together, and there's a clear roadmap. And again, to your point, I think that you can call it a no-fly zone or a shutdown period is key, because at some point you have to get to a steady state so that you can measure and see whether what you've been doing is effective. Otherwise, if you're constantly looking at change management and more implementation and more fine-tuning, you never really see the results, and also you can't really measure where you are on the journey, because that's key, because it's all about delivering results back to the business.
I wonder if the journey isn't the key though, isn't it? Because if we move from corporate HR provision to a shared service centre, then the umbilical is already tenuous. So then there's less concern about which element of the shared service leads on the further move to a global service, because actually you're looking at it more three-dimensionally from then anyway. So it's now, what does all of the parts of the shared service do that's the same? And irrespective of whether it's HR or finance or IT, if the activity is the same, well then that should start to come together as an activity, rather than saying, oh no, that's just HR part or anything else. If you take the NHS, whilst it's not global, it's the second largest employer in the world. So we work on a global size in that sense, and we very much are on a journey where we're moving in stages, so that there isn't that rip out of the heart of HR, but rather a gradual hemorrhaging away, so that when we finally, I think, move to a completely separate service, we'll find there'll be less heartfelt loss within the retained services.
How integrated are the different functions, shared services at the NHS?
It's very varied because it's such a huge organisation. But for instance, our HRMI services, our management information services, and our data are on a single Oracle base for the whole of the UK. You know, on the other hand, you'll get pockets of unified payroll and pockets of unified management services and so on. So it's still quite dispersed. But again, is on that journey of ultimately, I could see a time coming where there will be one global, in the sense of global for the whole of the NHS.
Has there been much pushback in that movement?
Yes, huge. I mean, we are the last large public sector arena, and there's always a great fear from staff representatives from unions that anything that takes people away from the heart of public sector values is challenging. So we have to make sure we're working closely with the unions as well to see that migration can work effectively for all of the parties. But thankfully, things like the government's move on allowing private sector bodies to engage with the public sector pension schemes have made that much easier going forward. And I think we'll see more of that now.
So what other things do you need to do to try and convince your workforce this is the way it should go?
I think it is that journey of doing it in sufficient stages so they retain that confidence. And so it isn't an immediate rip away to an offshoring environment, but rather it's a migration, proving always that we have a simple rule in the NHS: what gets measured gets done. So if you're moving your service of HR, it must still be measured and it must still deliver, so that the customers and the people supplying it still feel that they're delivering a service that's worthy.
I'm interested also from Bernd and Faye, you must have similar pushback to some level in your journeys.
Yeah, I mean, we're really seeing it as something which is going to help us drive a productivity increase in our hotels and in corporate, because so much of our activity today in HR is manual. We've got multiple systems. You know, it's not very sophisticated today, and it's sort of grown organically. So what we're trying to do, as I said, is to leapfrog to get to a really great system and a great set of processes. And that should, the fact that we're automating it and we're having in the future a lot of transactional HR type queries managed by an expert, by Hewlett Packard for us, that should free up a significant amount of time within our HR team. And what they can then get to is the higher value add HR activity that many of them just don't have the capacity to get to today. And we're going to build their skills, and then we're going to enable them to support our business to grow, because there's a significant amount of change programs across the entire organisation, and they all look to HR to support them, so we can refocus them on the higher value add activity. And the message actually out to our general managers and our line managers generally is that we will be able to free up your time. About half of their time that is spent today on HR back office activities will be freed up, and that's time they can give back to the guest in the hotel. So we think it's quite a positive story, and we're trying to think about it not really about a labour arbitrage activity, but how we can free up time so we can actually concentrate on the core, the purpose of the organisation, which is to deliver great hotels that guests love.
Dan, did you have something to add? Yeah,
and I think that the driving logic for the shared service centre so far has been an attempt to get wage arbitrage in place, drive cost savings down, this, that, and the other, which maybe the last 5-10 years should be the dominating event. There's something that's starting to happen now, though, which I think should just make us all sit up and think, maybe it's changed. And there was a brilliant piece in the FT last Monday, and it was talking about the annual bonus for a chief executive of one of the large insurance companies, one of the large global insurance companies. Now, this particular chief executive didn't get the stretch part of his bonus. Didn't get the stretch part of his bonus because it was actually based on on two things. It was based on employee satisfaction and customer satisfaction, and both of those targets were totally missed in within his business. Now we can turn around and we can talk about shared service centres, and if you get the model working completely right, then those employee measures, those customer measures will work properly. Well, that's an organisation that has done a pretty good job in terms of attracting cost savings from having shared service centres in place. But in terms of that chief executive is not a happy guy now. He didn't get his bonus. Something went wrong in terms of the whole engagement thing. And I think that as we come out of this horrible financial period and we start thinking about some of the other drivers, I think that there's going to be sort of, just a trend that says, yes, okay, got to absolutely drive down costs and be sensible, but employee engagement, customer experience, really, really, really important. And I think we're all going to be sort of pushed and tested to ask if we really are delivering that fantastically from sort of, from 9,000 miles away, from 800 miles away, from whatever it is.
I don't think there's a disconnect between employee engagement. Employee engagement is vital, absolutely. We're a people-based company. But just because you set up a shared service centre, I actually think the service you can provide is far better to the employees. And certainly our engagement levels over the last few years have been going up. They're about 80% positive employee engagement. So I don't think there's a disconnect. I think one of the biggest challenges when you set up an HR shared service centre is the HR business partnering side of things, and that's where it often falls down. What is this new job of an HR business partner, because you've taken away all perhaps the comfort things they're used to doing.
But doesn't it sort of, is it possible that it'll follow a similar trend to many of those organisations that have put contact centres offshore and this, that and the other, and the level of service just hasn't quite permeated, so these things have come closer, back on shore, closer to customers. Is there a possibility, a danger that sort of the whole HR shared service centre will come under the sort of the same spectrum, same guise, same debate?
My personal view is you can manage it. I've managed shared service centres for the last 10 years or so, and I think you can make them really work, but you do have to put an awful lot of hard work into setting them up right, communicating very, very clearly what it's all about, and very importantly explaining what those other roles are that surround the shared service centre, what the HR business partner role really is, and really investing in training and developing those people so they understand what their new roles are.
I think there's a real danger that what we do when we create shared service centres and ultimately outsourcing is we create the ability to measure the performance even better than we measured it when we were doing it ourselves. And the consequence, not only do we measure it, we publish it. And I've seen experiences when I've gone back to my workforce and said the new payroll outsource is now 99.8% effective, and they've cried about the 0.2% and said that's not people not getting paid. But the reality was when we did it in-house, it was even more inaccurate and more damaging to the workforce. So I think there is something about the engagement, but it's about the visibility of the facts and making people realise what exactly it is. And I have to say, and I'm not a supporter of business partners, but that's maybe for another roundtable debate, not this one. I think there's a real issue about us as a service in HR engaging and building a relationship with our partners, the other parts of the business, and that doesn't require us to run the payroll or to process paperwork or to investigate grievances. I don't think those are critical to the future of HR.
I just want to